Shifting gears again, the Harper government has been completely indifferent to the impact of climate change in Africa. History will probably bear out that to be his biggest crime in Africa. So it's the toll of climate change on the continent is significant. It's not just something in the future. In 2011, there was major famine in Somalia. Tens of thousands of people probably died. That's been connected to climate change by British scientists. The Climate Vulnerability Monitor has referred to hundreds of thousands of people dying already because of climate disturbances, a number expected to increase. A high proportion of those people are in Africa, generally the most vulnerable. The continent in general is vulnerable to climate change because there's a large number of people who are dependent on resource sectors, and there's a high degree of aridity across the continent. So a high degree of toll of climate change. Harper government doesn't care, pulled Canada out of the Kyoto Protocol, undermined international climate negotiation meetings, lobbied on behalf of heavy carbon-emitting tar sands interests in the US and Europe. And the Harper government also doesn't care about the fundamental injustice whereby most African countries emit less than 1/100th of the per capita emissions of Canada. So despite bearing the brunt of the initial toll of climate change, there's very little most African governments can do to lessen the impact because they're responsible for so little of the problem. The Harper government simply doesn't care about this fundamental injustice, to the point where in 2013, they made Canada the only country in the world not part of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification in countries seriously affected by drought and/or desertification, particularly in Africa. That's the actual name of the UN body. Which, as I've said elsewhere, maybe they need a PR firm to help them out with something a little catchier. But basically, the Harper government pulled Canada out of the UN body that gathers research on desertification, shares research on desertification, saved the Canadian government about $150,000 a year, completely irrelevant sum in the federal government budget, but I think it was highly symbolic of, one, their hostility towards science on the question of climate change, and more generally, their ambivalence towards the United Nations and just a total indifference to the impact of climate change on the continent.